we're providing the platform, we've got the infrastructure in place, we've got the distribution. If you develop a course or if you develop some kind of digital asset that we can sell, we'll give you half of the revenue. And that's kind of been the operating agreement for forever for anybody. So when we hire new people, when we onboard new people, we talk with them. Like, we're very overt about, like, we are not just a brick and mortar PT clinic. I like to say we're a knowledge dissemination unit.
Kick it.
Welcome to Strata Stories. My name is Schreiber. I'm the Director of Marketing here at Strata. Strata is a single EMR platform and revenue cycle management service for physical, occupational, and speech therapy practices that helps you achieve a 99.99% reimbursement rate. On today's episode, Paul Singh, the CEO of Strata, talks with Rafael Salazar, PT and the CEO of Proactive Rehab and Wellness. Paul and Rafi talk through the various ways to monetize your expertise as therapists, how to motivate staff to create content, and the importance of establishing a culture of consistency when it comes to creating that content. Then Rafi and Paul dive into hiring. The guys talk about when to fire a therapist and how to do so, and why you must make sure you're supporting employees during performance improvement periods. If you'd like to learn more about Strata and see how our EMR and RCM works, head over to stratapt.com to book a demo. Now, without further delay, here's today's episode.
By you paying, or at least by you making it okay for your staff to create content, on the clock, you're obviously giving them permission, overtly to do this. But on the flip side, how do you motivate them to do that? Is it something that you think about during the hiring process or the recruiting process, or is it some other thing that you're doing later on to kind of, because does that question sort of make sense?
Yeah,
how do you actually do that?
I think so we've got kind of two avenues there. Like, I did purchase the clinic, so there was staff in place before. And kind of when I brought this idea to them, two of the staff members, the previous owners worked with us for a couple of years and they left. So they really didn't have any interest in that. One of the team members, though, was kind of keen on it. Her husband owns his own tire mechanic shop. So she's kind of like got this entrepreneurial side. And we kind of mentioned at the very beginning, I'd always looked at it as kind of, I think last time we talked, like, Proactive is kind of the platform through which our knowledge will be disseminated, but it's also going to be like the platform that hopefully our team members can build their own personal brand on. And that's mutually beneficial, right? They're going to get some recognition, and patients will want to come and see them because of their content on XYZ. And then for us, obviously, we're kind of benefiting from that. And then there's the other ways of monetizing, the avenues of monetizing that expertise. So from the very beginning, when I brought it up, before we had hired anybody, I had said, like, listen, this can be a total, like, revenue split. Like, we're providing the platform, we've got the infrastructure in place, we've got the distribution. If you develop a course or if you develop some kind of digital asset that we can sell, we'll give you half of the revenue. And that's kind of been the operating agreement for forever for anybody. So when we hire new people, when we onboard new people, we talk with them. Like, we're very overt about, like, we are not just a brick and mortar PT clinic. We are I like to say we're a knowledge dissemination unit. And basically, however they want to be involved in that, as much or as little, is entirely up to them. Like, if they just want to punch a clock and treat patients, that's great. Those people don't tend to work for us, though. If they want to treat patients, use that expertise and leverage it in a way that can generate money for them in the future beyond just their productivity or their billable units or whatever, then we provide that for them. So over the past couple of years, we've had people that were like certified exercise trainers on the side. Maybe they were like a PTA and they had this exercise certification. They did a workshop on exercise, fit and healthy living as you age. And we charged, $20 a pop or something like that. And we just split the revenue 50-50 or something. And that was kind of a couple reasons behind that. One, I've already shared, like, this idea of us being experts and being known as experts and disseminating knowledge in a way that is monetized outside of just this patient relationship. And then the other way is, like, we're a small clinic, like we don't have the resources to compete with big hospitals with insurance and benefits and all that. But if we can say, listen, like your income here could be uncapped depending on how much you want to put the gas pedal down, right? So it's worked out for us a little bit on both ends there.
That's pretty cool. And I'm always just personally curious. Um, is this something that you like? You seem really comfortable with this media side of things. Is that sort of like a reflection of something else you did in a previous career, or was this
In a
like
previous
I
life,
guess let me
yeah.
rephrase this question. If we time traveled back to when this was all happening, and
Yeah.
I was talking to Rafi that day, did you feel like this was a bet? Like you're like, hey, I'm going to just try something new? Or is this something where you were coming from somewhere else and it had worked and you're like, I'm running the playbook again? What was that like?
Yeah. So back in, 3 or 4 years before I bought the clinic, I went out on my own and did independent consulting. And that business was built on my content, right? The people, like my first couple clients might have been like networks that I had in the area, so maybe some connections. But then it kind of grew from this idea of, and I got this idea from a guy named Blair Enns. I think I mentioned him last time, from Win Without Pitching. And it's a sales training organization for creative firms, basically marketing firms, graphic design firms. And the way that their lead generation plan is built, it's built on content. So you're driving, like if you look at the order um of prospects and traffic, you've got like the highest level are people that know you, like you, trust you, they've been following you for a while, and they're just reaching out to know how big of a check they need to write to work with you, right? And that's kind of what you want. Those are the people that you want working with you or reaching out to you. And the only way you get there is by creating content that shares your expertise and the value you can create. So I did that starting in 2017, was just writing. Like writing was my medium. It was just very easy for me to write, not because I'm like a super, super awesome writer. Just it's what worked for me. And I was at the time I was, doing consulting over here. I had projects over there, but I could bang out an article relatively quickly. Recently it's changed into like video and stuff, but and the podcast. But at the very initial parts of that business, all the work was basically coming from people that saw me on LinkedIn, read something that I had wrote, and then were interested in learning more. One thing led to another, and we did a project, right? So I kind of took that idea, and I'd had relatively, decent success with that as a solo consultant. So I took that idea and just kind of implemented it into the business here at Proactive, and it really makes sense for clinicians because we are clinical experts, right? We went to school for something very specialized. A lot of the people that are passionate about something can take that knowledge and apply it for their, this half marathon or this, CrossFit or whatever it is. Like you're filtering everything through this highly educated and technical expertise. So why not use that to drive the business, drive revenue, drive all of that?
I'll take a wild guess here, and I would I would say that probably a couple times a week, maybe a couple times a month, for some non-zero amount of times every time period. I imagine some other practice owner comes to you and says, Rafi, I love what you're doing with content. I want to get started. Like I know that's a broad question,
Yeah.
and I'm not trying to bait you, but I'm just kind of curious. Like, what do you say to somebody like that? Like what do a practice owner comes to you and says, "Man, I love what you're doing with content. Where do I start?" What's the first thing you tell them?
Yeah, part of it, I tell people like you got to lead, you got to build the culture around it, right? So you got to lead through example. So I was writing articles and doing videos for Proactive before I took it over. Like I set up the website, had the domain name ready to roll as we were like in the middle of the acquisition. Because I wanted to lay the foundation at the very beginning of you're not just a shoulder stretcher or a knee rehabber. Like you are an expert, a clinical expert, and it is. I mean, I almost speak of it like this at staff meetings. Like, if you have knowledge to share, some insight to share, it is almost incumbent upon you to share it, right? And now that we've got this established in the culture of the clinic, if you would, like we're always talking about, oh, maybe we should do an article on this. We've talked about maybe doing a podcast down the line. We've talked about maybe doing something else. And it's at this point of the game, it's not, I'm not poking and prodding people as much. And, people know like, oh, I got a cancellation, I'm gonna knock out an article or I'm gonna shoot a video. But you have to start at the very beginning with one, leading by example, and then establishing that as the culture of the organization. So we talk about it when we're onboarding, like I mentioned earlier, we talk about it at staff meetings, we talk about it kind of just casually in between patients, like, oh, I think I'm going to write an article on this, or I'm going to do a video on that. Like, oh, Mr. So-and-so was a great example of this exercise. I wonder if I can just knock one video out in between, before my next patient to kind of show how not to make that mistake or something like that.
So it's so interesting you talk about culture though too, because it's and I mean this with all the respect in the world. It's sort of a nuanced thing. I mean, you're a lot of people that I talk to about this, if they say anything at all about this topic, it's kind of like, oh, I had to start by being consistent. Like they just start with like something tactical like that, where they're like posted once a day or I wrote once a day. Like it's something very, very tactical. And you're sort of approaching this, or at least the way I would summarize how you're approaching this is like you're approaching it from a cultural standpoint, sort of more strategic standpoint, and then letting that define what tactics you use.
Yeah, and part of that is self-serving, right? Like the last thing I wanted was in 4 years for patients to be coming through the door and being like, I want to see Rafi because I see him on the videos and I read his stuff. Like I'm only seeing Rafi, but we've got a team built, right? Like I want that for everybody. Spread the love around a little bit.
If you don't mind asking though, how do you deal with that? Like what, like just, more tactically, how do you deal with that? They, a lot of times practice owners, they start practices for a lot of different reasons, of course, but, somehow, some way, a lot of them then find themselves sort of having created themselves a job they can't get out of in the sense that like often, that success that they have ends up encouraging, patients to only seek them and they can't get out from behind that, or at least they feel like they can't. How do you guys deal with that? And there's probably a couple different ways we could go with this conversation. Like, let's just, it could be, hey, one of your content creators is like crushing it on golf content. I'm just making this up. And then they leave, do the patients go, or, what if provider is just so busy they can't take on new patients? Like, how do you guys deal with that?
Yeah, so we've handled it a couple ways. Like at the very, very beginning, when I bought the clinic, it was just a PT clinic. I'm an OT, so it took about 6 months for me to get credentialed with all the insurance companies. So there was a period of time when I was creating content and I was kind of like the face of the company, but I didn't touch a patient, like I just didn't do it. And because of like on the OT side, with my relationship with the university and the fact that I've taught so many cohorts, all of the OTs that we brought on board, or the OT that we have on board now, the one that we're hiring, she's about to graduate and then she'll be our newest team member. Like those are students that we've had. So from like the OT standpoint, it's very easy to be like, yeah, Rafi has set the vision. Rafi might be the expert. Yada. I hate referring to myself like that in the third person. But, this is so-and-so and one of their brightest students. And, we brought him on board because of that, right? So that narrative is very easy. Patients are totally happy with that. In fact, I feel like there have been times where I've stepped in, Chandler's called in sick or something like that, or she's out. So I see one of her patients while she's gone. And that patient will be like, like no offense against you, but when's Chandler coming back? And part of that like steps into the next piece, which is we're very big at the clinic about building relationships with patients. And I know people say that like super, oh, healthcare is relational, yada, yada, yada. But it really is. And we've kind of systematized the way that we do it at the clinic so that somebody comes in, they might be seeing, Courtney because she wrote a bunch of content on training for a half marathon or something like that. And they want to see Courtney because they're working on their half marathon. The way we structure kind of the onboarding of this patient is that, okay, well, this is Courtney and she's going to be doing your evaluation, yada, yada, yada. But this is Brooke, her teammate, her assistant. And this is like, you will only be shared between those two. And we try very hard to kind of take this almost team-based approach. Like, you're not going to come to Proactive and get passed around to every therapist in there based on availability. Like we work very hard to make sure that that's not a thing that happens. So it helps us kind of build maybe this little personal brand around a clinician. But then we're also able to kind of alleviate and pass off. And after people get to know you for a while and kind of get, again, culture is one of those words that people throw around flippantly, but once they kind of get a feel for the clinic, the atmosphere of the clinic, then they become a lot less resistive to that. But at the very, very beginning, in the early stages, we're like very, very rigid and intentional about making sure that that continuity is maintained throughout that patient's initial experience until they become more trusting of other clinicians. And then it becomes, like maybe you came in for a hip injury after running or something like that, but you've been in the clinic for a while, you've been improving that, but you've got some pelvic floor dysfunction. And because you've been in and out and kind of know how we're doing it, oh, well, Susanna does pelvic floor, and we kind of, it's an easier handoff. And that's kind of how we've approached it. We've tried to take it very much like relationships are important, absolutely. But I've always tried to think of it as like we want patients to have a solid relationship with proactive, which is much more difficult to do than like we have a solid relationship with Rafi. And when Rafi leaves, we're screwed. Like the clinic was around for 10 years before I took it over, before I bought it, or just shy of 10 years before I bought it. And there were people that had been seeing the two owners literally on and off for 7 or 8 years. And when they both retired and left, I don't know if we've lost a couple of them because they've departed this earth. Otherwise, basically everybody who was a returning patient from the old days still comes to proactive because we kind of made that transition to their relationship with us, not me or not Diane or not, like that transition needs to be managed. But if you do it well, they're very sticky patients at that point.
And I say this with all the respect in the world. It's like you're taking a long-term view on this, and I think it's pretty rare. I mean, I think a lot of companies don't do anything at all, and if they do something, like I'm sure anybody listening to this has experienced this. You ever like get an email from somebody and it's got this huge disclaimer at the bottom of the email and it says like, my views are not reflective of the company that I work for. it's like if companies do anything at all, which they don't, it's that. And then, you're sitting here taking, explaining a much longer term view, which I think is pretty cool. So maybe just switching gears here a little bit. You did a relatively recent podcast episode talking about when it's time to let an employee go.
Oh yeah.
And I know that, we'll obviously like clean this up in post and make it, make the transition
Sure.
less jarring, but kind of curious about that. But yeah, well, how do you think about that? I know you talk. We'll link to the episode in the show notes here, but kind of wanted to hear it from you directly. Like, how do you think of that? What do you how do you know when it's time to let them loose?
Sure. Yeah, I think I know this adage has been out there for a while, but like be slow to hire, quick to fire. We've tried to maintain that. Now, obviously, like there are times when, and I've made this mistake myself, like we needed a PT. We had referrals, backing up. The job market was tight. We needed a body to treat patients. And those are the people that we've let go. They were not with us for very long.
Yep.
Like almost we hired somebody, and like almost the first day that they started, I was like, this is not going to be a long-term fit. Right. But at the same time, we needed people, and he was treating patients, and like you hate to be one of those companies that's like, oh, we need a body to fill a job. But at that time, cash was tight. We just bought the business. It was losing $50,000 a quarter. We needed a patient that was, or a clinician that could treat patients. So, and that was one of those things that I made the determination after that experience, like I'll never do that again. I'll cash flow it another way. I'll sell assets off, but we're not going to make a bad hire just to hire somebody. So we do take a longer term, a longer like onboarding process to hire somebody in the recruiting, and we almost make it like they have to qualify themselves. If they stick around till the end, that's wonderful, and they'll probably be a good fit. So there's that piece. We are slow to hire, which usually means that after somebody takes an application or sends us some kind of inquiry, usually there's like a phone call involved. And I'm like, because of my past life as a consultant and like working for the federal government, like processes and SOPs is just kind of what I do. So I've got some of that stuff like documented, like a checklist for people when we're onboarding somebody to screen applicants. So, the front office person can do this checklist and say, okay, yeah, you check the boxes. I'm going to forward your resume to whoever, head of PT or Rafi for OT or whatever it is. And then there's another checklist, like, does this person meet XYZ? Let's get on the phone with them. Let's have a conversation. If that conversation goes well, and what we're asking for there is not technical ability or clinical expertise. My feeling is that you can teach just about anybody who's a licensed physical therapist or occupational therapist to be a good clinician, to be an excellent clinician. What we're looking for really is personality and vision or values alignment. So again, this stuff is super public on our website. You can go click about us and see how we view healthcare. So we have that on the website, how we view healthcare, what we believe, what our mission is. And we do talk about this a lot. Again, going back to that culture thing, we talk about it a lot. We use that stuff not as like, big stickers that we put on the wall that people see when they walk into the clinic, but like we use it as a filtering guide for our decisions. So we are kind of building this in again in the culture. So as we are bringing somebody on the recruiting side, we're asking them questions about this piece of our vision, or what stuck out to you about our website, or what have you heard about us and what made you reach out. And obviously if they say, well, I'm a new grad and I need a job, like their application is going to the lower stack of the of the list. So we do try to hire very intentionally. Done. Moving on. When do you know it's time to fire somebody? Really the whole point of that episode was really like a gut check for me and for all the other leaders, of two things. One, like when it's time to fire somebody, it's time to do it like yesterday. Like you don't wait around when it's time to fire somebody. You treat it like a cancer and you cut it out, right? Because if not, it's going to grow, it's going to spread, it's going to get nasty in your clinic, or your practice. And the other thing was really to outline like how I think about it when it comes time to look at performance appraisals, or the question of a team member leaving. Did I do everything in my like sphere of influence, or did I live up to my responsibilities as a leader to ensure that this patient or that this team member had everything they needed to succeed? A lot of times, what I've noticed this about myself, I've noticed this about other issues that I've kind of been involved in the consulting world. Like somebody's ready to fire somebody, and if you dig into the reasons why, some of them are very legitimate reasons. They're not meeting this benchmark. They're not meeting this standard that I have for them. But if you dig into that situation, you realize that there's a lot of mismatched expectations or just unknown expectations, right? Like how can you fire somebody for not meeting a benchmark they didn't know they were supposed to meet? Right. There is that piece. Like I will take a very strong like self-assessment of the situation before I pull the fire trigger on somebody. And that is like I'll go through and see like their communications between me and them, or between their manager and them, or whatever. And I'll look at the situation and kind of like, is there a documented path? One thing I hate about the federal government is that it literally took like 6 to 18 months to let go of a troublesome employee. Like that is the far end of the spectrum. But on the other end of the spectrum, you've got like, I live in Georgia. Georgia's an at-will state. You could come in tomorrow and I could say, I'm replacing you with Jim because he's going to take $10 less an hour than you, or whatever it is, right? Obviously, like you have a responsibility just to be a good human and not do that to people. So I like to fall somewhere in the middle. So typically the process, like when somebody knows they're about to get fired, and I'm very upfront with the team about this, like if we have a meeting and something ends up in writing that says, these are your dysfunctions, or the areas that you're falling short on, this is the plan or the expectations that I have as the leader for you to meet. This is what you're going to do to meet it, and this is what I'm going to do to support you. Like if you have that in place, like we had this meeting and that paper, that report was generated, you got to be aware that that's like, we are moving towards that. And it's not like I'm not a confrontational person. So I'm not like, this is one of those things, like, you better get your stuff together. it's just people know like that's what's happening. Like you met with Rafi, this is what happened. It's just a matter of fact, not threatening. This is just the process. And then we meet again. And in the interim, I am doing whatever I said I was going to do. Like I never put it just on the team member. I'm never like, listen, you've got to increase your productivity, or you've got to do whatever. You've got to stop whatever the problem is. And that's it. Like there's always like, this is how you're going to meet that, and this is how Proactive is going to support you in that. And then there's like, again, we have a small clinic. There's only 10 of us here, 10 of us on the team. So it's like there's time for me to kind of pop in and out in between stuff going on. Be like, hey, how's it going on XYZ? Is there anything you need help with? And my experience has been, now it's a small experience because I've only done this for 4 years as a clinic owner here. I've been involved in a ton of these as a consultant, but it's different when it's your own team members. I used to tell people, like, as a consultant, I would just kick the door in and be like, you're screwing up here, here, and here. I'll be back in 6 months. We'll see how the numbers look. With your own team members, it's different because you're seeing them every day. But generally, the people that are not a good fit and that would not have been there long term, like you sit down and have that meeting with them and they're already looking for other jobs,
Right.
They will rid themselves, or you will rid yourselves of them pretty easily.
Right.
On the other side are people that genuinely like it. They're good team members. They're just, maybe they've got a skills deficiency, or they've got like a professionalism issue that you need to work on. Those people, if you have that meeting with them, and they're good team members, and they're going to be a good fit, they're going to be seeking you out as to, okay, I'm having this issue. I was able to do XYZ, but I'm falling short there. And there've been a couple times where I've been like, listen, the timeline rolled around and you weren't there, but you've shown significant progress, or at least an effort to improve. Like, we're not putting anybody on the chopping block here. We're just, this is part of my role as the leader, right? Like, I'm supposed to make you successful. And if you're not successful because of something I've failed to do, that's my fault. It's not your fault. So that's kind of how I view firing. Now, there are times, like I said, like when it's time to fire somebody, it's time to fire somebody.
It's not going to sound like a compliment, but it is. But it's, you're using that. I forget exactly what phrase you used, but you talked about like your big business experience or whatever in the past. Like you're running a playbook that is proven in a lot of other industries, but I don't think is kind of widely talked about in this one.
Yeah, especially in private practice, because you and I were talking about it before we were recording. Like a lot of people, they went into private practice for whatever. Like they went into it to treat patients or to build a lifestyle, whatever. They didn't think at the end of the day, there's people that I'm managing. And what does that mean, right? Like, I think there's one thing to be an owner of a business and to be like, I'm the owner. And then there's another thing to understand, like, what that actually means. Managing people in and of itself is a skill set that needs to be developed. And it's one of those things that we should always be working on, right?
Man, like, see, this is the kind of stuff where I could turn this into like another hour-long kind of, what's the word? Like tangent. But, I think the thing is, like, you talk about these things with a certain confidence because you've been doing it for a while and it's worked, and, you've probably iterated over time. And I think on the flip side, I talk to a lot of practice owners that are just trying to make it work. And they're just kind of like, oh, but I know the provider, and gosh, how will we, like, our kids are on the same soccer team, and, and it's like, they're stuck. They've like essentially created their own sort of prison accidentally. One last thing I wanted to kind of maybe talk about is, if I just when I sort of scanned your podcast to kind of like catch up on like your thinking as we got to know each other, it's not hard to see that you talk a lot about tech or technology, like, and I kind of want to leave this broad because I'm curious where you go with this, but you have this sort of overarching theme where you sort of seem to always come back to technology and you embrace it and that sort of thing. Can you talk about that? Like, you could either you can start like kind of high level, like how you think about the PT space evolving with tech, or you can kind of go tactical, how have you guys embraced tech? I'm kind of curious, how do you think about that? And if that's too broad, by the way, I can go a little bit more narrow.
No, I mean, I think, so we'll start high level and kind of move down tactical. I don't know how old y'all are, but like I'm 34-ish, 35. Okay. So when I grew up, like dial-up internet was still a thing. We had the little MSN butterfly, like to log on. We couldn't be on the internet for more than 10 minutes because mom had to make a phone call, right? Like floppy disks. It was a huge deal that you could save like 2 Word docs fit on a floppy disk or whatever. And just in the last, 15, 20 years, the explosion of technology has really infiltrated almost every area of our lives, right? And without getting into the weeds about like regulation and all of that, like healthcare is a laggard, and laggard is not even the right word to use. Like we're still in the Stone Age, like there are people that still fax things to our office, right? Like fax is the only way to get things done. Funny enough, it's the only way to get stuff done at the IRS. We had an issue with the IRS, and they were like, well, the only way to get in contact with us is so you have to fax it. And I was like, why? And they said, because that's the only secure method. I'm like, I'm pretty sure like we have national security administration stuff on an online hard drive somewhere, right? Like there's a server somewhere that NSA is operating. So yeah, like it's unbelievable to me how much of a disconnect there is between regular life and then like receiving healthcare. So, and part of this too was I was at the VA in the early 2010s, 2012, 2013 is when I started my career there. And we were doing telehealth there then not because it was cool and it was whiz bang, but it was like out of necessity, right? We had the VA system is set up in, you got the main hospitals, and then you got CBOCs, which are community-based outpatient centers that might have like primary care and lab, and that's it. So we would have patients 2-3 hours away, maybe from a CBOC, and another 2 or 3 hours to get to the clinic. So instead of like having them drive 6 hours for a 1-hour PT or OT appointment, it just made much more sense. Like when you're in for your yearly with your PCP, we'll do a virtual with the OTs or the PTs on staff. We'll kind of give you some exercises, some whatever. And then this was about the same time the VA was rolling out secure messaging. Like we can handle it that way. And that way you're not taking all this time to come in, right? So we were doing that before it was like a thing. In fact, like I remember the first time I treated somebody in the private sector after leaving the VA. So I did the consulting, and I knew that consulting was kind of wonky. So I was like, oh, I'll just get a PRN job at an outpatient clinic. And the first time I treated a patient in that clinic, I said something like, oh, well, if that's not a problem, just hit me up on the secure messaging channel, or maybe we can do a virtual or something like that. And the patient was like, huh, you could do that? And I was like, I don't see why we can't. And the practice owner was like, no, insurance doesn't pay for that. There's no way for us to do that. Right. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, why are we not doing this? It was an experience. Right. So like high level, we are at the place in the world where like you want food, you hit an app, and Grubhub brings it to your office, right? Like, why can't we do something very simple as like communicate with our clinicians? So that's kind of how I see it in the whole. Like I look at technology not so much as like, oh, this new thing that's going to like radically change healthcare. It's like, no, this is like just part of our lives. Like, how do we make it work in healthcare? Like, how do we take the convenience that we all get from technology and apply that to the experience of receiving healthcare? So that's how I look at it. And some of it is just very intuitive. Maybe it is because I was doing it at the VA for a while, or maybe it's because I like have this entrepreneurial like ADHD going on in my head. But like I see something and I'm like, oh, that could totally work in a clinic. Like, why are we not doing that? Or, like Garmin watches or something like that. Like we've been doing this in the fitness industry forever. Why are we not like monitoring patients for PT, like their normal activity or something like that? Like stuff like that just doesn't make sense to me. So tactically what we've done at the clinic is just try to, as much as we can, integrate technology into the patient experience, but then also the service delivery. And we can get into the weeds about that if you want to, but kind of high level, that's how I see it. It should not be this like marketing ploy or this thing that like gets clicks about like, oh, it's going to revolutionize healthcare. It's really just like, what do we got to do to bring our industry into the 21st century?
Thanks for listening to another episode of Strata Stories. Strata is a single EMR platform and revenue cycle management service for physical, occupational, and speech therapy practices that helps you achieve a 99.99% reimbursement rate. If you'd like to learn more about Strata and see how our EMR and RCM works, head over to stratapt.com to book a demo.